how often the Krell technicians have ridden in this little vehicle.
What now, Dr. Morbius?
Prepare your minds for a new scale of physical scientific values, gentlemen.
Guys, welcome to a classic film review of 1956's science fiction classic, Forbidden Planet, starring Leslie Nielsen, Walter Pidgeon and Anne Francis. Now, this was directed by Fred Wilcox, and it's a sci-fi adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest, and sees the crew of a spaceship go to investigate why communication has been lost with a far-off planet's colony. Actually sounds a bit familiar. But what they find is the only two remaining survivors and a terrible secret. Now, for the time, this was a big-budget, million-dollar Cinemascope spectacle in an age when studios tended not to treat the science fiction genre with that much respect and kind of peddled them out as B-movies. Here, though, with no less than William Shakespeare providing the concept, you're going to see the seeds of a whole subgenre of sci-fi being created, seeds that would grow into 2001, Star Trek, Lost in Space, Doctor Who, etc, etc. Now, Forbidden Planet is one of the most influential science fiction films since 1927's Metropolis, so let's take a look. So, Forbidden Planet is set in the 23rd century and has the crew of an interstellar starship land on the distant planet of Altair IV. Their mission is to determine what happened to an expedition of colonists that was sent there 20 years earlier. Now, things are off to a suspicious start when a Dr. Edward Morbius, played by Walter Pidgeon, one of the original expedition scientists, warns the ship not to land on the planet, but Commander John J. Adams, played by Leslie Nielsen, follows his own orders and ignores the warning.
Commander, if you set down on this planet, I warn you that I cannot be answerable for the safety of your ship or your crew.
If you'll just supply me with landing coordinates.
So, as I mentioned, on the planet, the crew find only two survivors, the aforementioned Dr. Morbius and his lovely daughter, Altaira, played by Anne Francis, as well as Robbie the robot, their mechanical helper. Now, let me get this straight. The crew learned the planet was once inhabited by a superior race named the Krell. The Krell are long since extinct, and having used the planet's energy to artificially expand their intelligence, they ultimately fell prey to a deadly force. Now, that overly inquisitive Dr. Morbius has been using some of their ancient technology, and let me tell you, it's no coincidence that soon an unseen force, an unseen evil starts picking off the crew one by one. So, what is the connection between Morbius, his daughter's temptation of some of the hot-blooded crew members, and a newly awakened invisible monster? Well, you'll have to watch to find out, but in the meantime we have Leslie Nielsen playing the ship's commander, J.J. Adams. Now, most audience members will know Nielsen for his comedy roles, the Naked Gun and Airplane movies, for instance, but he'd been in serious TV roles since 1950, and Forbidden Planet was one of his first feature film roles. Now, I did grow up watching him in full-on spoof mode, so it's always interesting seeing his serious side. He'll probably be unrecognisable here to most modern audience members. Anyway, he and his crew land on this forbidden planet and are immediately greeted by one of cinema's most famous robots, named Robbie. A brilliant piece of 50s design, all whirling cogs, levers and lights. And he takes Leslie Nielsen and his two officers to Dr. Morbius's sleek, ultra-modern home, where they not only learn that the rest of his colony was torn limb from limb by said mysterious force.
One by one, in spite of every safeguard, my co-workers were torn literally limb from limb.
By what?
By some devilish thing that never once showed itself.
And a Bellerophon?
Vaporized as the three remaining survivors tried to take her off.
But also that he has a daughter, Altaira, played by the lovely Anne Francis, in a series of minute outfits. Now, her being naive in the ways of men and the crew members having been cooped up together on a long space journey, of course, results in some romantic hijinks as a little love triangle develops between the commander, his lieutenant, and the skimpily clad Altaira. Now, this may be a suitable time to mention that this may be the first Hollywood appearance of what would come to be known as the miniskirt. God bless this film. Now, before I continue, I have to quickly zip back to Robbie the robot, because I think he's an important character, not just in this film, but in sci-fi cinema history. Robbie the robot is either an extremely early example, or possibly the first example of a robot that displayed a human personality. Of course, I'll stand corrected, but is this the first human mimicking artificial intelligence in film?
I am at your disposal with 187 other languages along with their various dialects and sub-tongues.
Colloquial English will do fine, thank you.
And while we're on the subject of cinema firsts, welcome to the first electronic score for a Hollywood feature film. Husband and wife team Lewis and Bebe Barron, whose bizarre and often creepy music for Forbidden Planet stunned audiences of the time and was so revolutionary that the Musicians' Union forced the studio to title the Forbidden Planet score Electronic Tonalities and not music. Now, the Barons can't really claim to have invented it, but the entire electronic music industry is built on a foundation that they helped lay down. Now, there are plot points here that I'll be intentionally vague about, certainly regarding the fate of the planet's previous inhabitants 200,000 years ago, and also how this mysterious force is causing havoc with the ship's crew. But I'd be remiss not to mention that there is a brilliantly realised monster on show in Forbidden Planet, and yeah, it seems quite quaint now, but at the time was expertly animated by Walt Disney animator Joshua Meador. Now, obviously these days it's clearly a piece of hand-drawn animation dropped into a live-action movie, but for 1956 this was cutting-edge visual effects work. Now, not everything in the film works as well. There are some jarring, even for the time, flying saucer shots as the ship comes into land on the planet's surface, and it's all clearly shot on the MGM sets, actually the reused sets from The Wizard of Oz. Despite that though, there's a widescreen Technicolor charm to proceedings where the sets, costumes and visual effects all fuse really well. It won't shock you to hear that Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry cited Forbidden Planet as a huge inspiration for his creation. Even a glimpse of this film may trick you into thinking it's an original Star Trek episode. I mean, check out how the crew prepare for coming out of lightspeed. It's essentially the same effect as being beamed aboard the Enterprise. Now, even for a straight-up sci-fi genre entry like this one, there is some daftness. Like Robbie the Robot, for all his trend-setting and great design, is really just relegated to comic relief status for the most part. And the less said about the crew's cook, the better. He probably ages the film more than the painted backgrounds and laser beams could hope to.
Hey! Well, you low-living contraption, I ought to take a can opener to you.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
So I personally believe that Forbidden Planet deserves its place on the Mount Rushmore of science fiction films. It's the first example of such a movie tackling its themes in a relatively sincere fashion. Yeah, there's ray guns and monsters and robots and flying saucers, but it's operating several levels above the 1930s Flash Gordon serials that were essentially rescue the damsel in distress westerns in space. Now, this film fuses elements of Shakespeare's 17th century play The Tempest and folds in and expands upon warnings of the dangers of colonialism. It's a film from the atomic age, so you can also read into it the dangers of man harnessing great powers that he does not understand. Now, of course, 1956, it's right around the time that the former USSR and the USA began assembling their space programs, and therefore Forbidden Planet takes both the dangers of exploration and the fears of harnessing mass energy and has them coalesce into one of the most essential science fiction movies in film history. Go check it out.
Conclusion that man is unfit as yet to receive such knowledge, such almost limitless power.
Whereas Morbius, with his artificially expanded intellect, is now ideally suited to administer this power for the whole human race.
Precisely, Doctor.